Dietitian Gabby, good morning.
Today is a lovely Sunday, and we thank God for that.
What do you have for us?
So just like we started the previous week, we started with weight management in adults in Ghana. Today we are going to go into weight management in children.
Okay.
So we are going to talk about weight management in children. And so when it comes to children, you realize that when it comes to weight management in children, they are both ends of the spectrum. We have the side that you can find a lot of children suffering from underweight or undernutrition, as some may call it. And you can find other people suffering from overnutrition. And overnutrition results in obesity. So comparing it to the adults, it's quite the same. We have the underweight, people who want to gain weight, or children who want to gain weight. And then we have children who are obese, and then they want to lose weight. So when it comes to weight management in children, just like adults, we are looking at underweight and obesity in children. In Ghana, for instance, many children living in less endowed communities are underweight. So we find when you take the kids in Ghana, most of them are underweight. And these people usually are living in rural communities, or they are living in less endowed communities. So example, like the Zongo communities, you don't find obese children in the Zongo communities.
Mm-hmm.
You're definitely going to find children who are underweight. And then when you go to the other end, where communities which are more endowed, like communities that have, let's say, richer in quotes, you find out that these children coming from these communities are gradually entering into the obesity range. Okay, so it looks like there is two problems when it comes to weight or weight management in Ghana. We are tackling undernutrition and we are tackling overnutrition. Overnutrition.
Okay.
So overnutrition is gradually becoming a problem among the elite, or let's say the people who have a higher socioeconomic status. Let's put it that way. So in the less endowed communities in Ghana, you find children who are underweight, stunted, and wasted. In the more endowed communities, you find children who are obese. So you realize that there is a weight disparity in socioeconomic living status of people living in Ghana. So when you are coming from a low socioeconomic status, you realize that children coming from those aspects are usually underweight, stunted, wasted, and then children coming from higher socioeconomic status are usually obese. And then when you compare these two groups of children, you realize that on one hand, the children who are coming from low socioeconomic status, you realize that these children are children whose parents cannot afford 3 square meals, their parents cannot afford snacks, their parents cannot afford fruits, protein sources, and they are stuck with whatever their parents have for them. So there is lack of diversity and variety in their food. You realize that their food is just one way. They can't afford 3 square meals. Some of them eat morning and then later in the evening. But on the other hand, you find parents parents with high socioeconomic status in our society. You realize that their children, overeat. They eat well, and sometimes you realize that they even overeat, and then they take in foods that are high in fats. They take in a lot of sausages. They take in a lot of fatty foods. They take in a lot of carbonated drinks. Basically, what I'm saying is that their diet is unrestricted or uncurbed. So when you look at this, you realize that for these children, everything is available and there is less restriction on their food intake. So therefore, when it comes to weight management in children in Ghana as a country, we are faced with a double burden. And when I say a double burden, it means that on one hand, we are stopping undernutrition. On the other hand, overnutrition or obesity is on the rise among children in Ghana. So it's very important that we look at these situations or these issues as they are and tackle them individually. For instance, we know where we can find undernutrition in Ghana, and these are places of low socioeconomic status. So places like Zongo communities, you realize that they are predominantly there. children who are wasted, children who are undernourished, children who are stunted. Now, the problem is that it has an effect on the country at large, because when you look at undernutrition, when you find children who are stunted, when I say stunted, a child is shorter than how he or she is supposed to be. That is the meaning of stunting. Undernutrition, the child is hasn't gotten the right amount of nutrition. Wasted, the child grows lean. When you find children of this kind, what happens is that it rather affects the country as a whole. So, for instance, these children, stunting, for example, these children are deprived of future opportunities. For example, playing basketball. You realize that a stunted child will be disadvantaged in playing basketball. And now when you go to the outside world, you realize that these sporting activities are the things that have taken over. So being undernourished, being wasted, being stunted, it deprives you of so many opportunities when you are growing up. And then overnutrition, on the other hand, also puts a child at risk of developing. If the parents are already obese, you realize that what happens is that the child is likely to also grow to become an obese child. And then obesity puts a child at risk of diabetes, hypertension, stroke, hypercholesterol, and the rest. So these are two edges or two ends of the spectrum we are supposed to fight as a country. Tackling undernutrition and tackling overnutrition or obesity. So let's take a look at childhood obesity. So we'll delve a little bit into childhood obesity because this is getting out of hand. It is rather on the rise than decreasing. So childhood obesity is one of the most serious public health challenges of the 21st century. The problem is global and is steadily affecting many low and middle income countries, particularly urban settings. Obesity in childhood is known to have significant impact on both physical and psychological health. So you find a lot of children who are, obese because in this 21st century, our diets are modified. You find diets that are high in fat, diets that are actually sweetened, and then what you realize is that these children are not able, to fit well in the society because sometimes they develop some psychological, issues because when you are in a class and then you realize that there is an overweight child or obese child, the child is not able to live well in the classroom, and all this causes depression. It causes a lot of stress on the child, and it's negatively affects the child in class. So obesity or overweight is a challenge when it comes to the classroom setting. So obesity, let's look at the definition of childhood obesity. So the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, they define obesity in children and young people as a BMI at or above the 95th percentile for young people of the same age and sex. So let me break this down. So you can't just look at somebody and it's possible to look at someone to say this child is obese, but then it has to be measurable as well. So the Center for Disease Control define obesity as a BMI for age. When we say BMI simply means body mass index. It is your body weight over your height squared. So when you calculate that figure and then you look at it in terms of the child's age, for instance, when you have a BMI or a body mass index of, let's say, 14, and you look at it for a child who is about 5 years, you realize that this is way bigger for a child who is 5 years. So when you look at that measurement and it is above the 95th percentile, so what it means is that the 95th percentile, what it means is that for a child of that particular age, that child is bigger than 95% of the population. That is basically the meaning of 95th percentile. So it compares that particular measurement with 95% of the population. Also, WHO defines overweight as the standard deviation body mass index for age to be 2 standard deviation above. So what that also means is that when you look at the body mass index, overweight is 2 standard deviations, away from the normal. So it means that when you have the normal people, they are on the edge. That is the meaning of the 2 standard deviation. So they are on the edge, where we have 2 edges, one edge being underweight. In the middle is normal.
The best songs on the radio.
On the further
Good is radio. We make it good to you.
On the further edge is overweight or obesity. So when you look at that, that is how WHO and then Center for Disease Control define the meaning of obesity. So let's look at how, or the spread of obesity in the world. According to WHO, nearly 1 in every 5 children and adolescents are overweight and obese. So when you pick 5 children, nearly 1 of them will be obese. And that is how, serious the problem is in our world today. And 41 million children under the age of 5 were overweight or obese in 2016. So in 2016, about 41 million children. And that's a huge chunk when it comes to numbers. And over 340 million children and adolescents aged 5 to 19 were overweight or obese in 2016. So that's a huge chunk of number. 340 million of children worldwide are obese. Then it means it's a world problem. Even comparing it to, coronavirus, this has higher number than coronavirus.
Yeah.
So it's a big issue to tackle, because when you look at this, you are, estimating that if this about 340 million people are obese, majority of them, without taking a look at their diets, majority of them are going to end up obese. And obesity, it's a risk factor for diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular diseases. So it means that these children are also going to grow up to live with these conditions. And this is not fair, because we can do something about it now. So let's look at assessment of undernutrition and overnutrition, assessment of obesity. So when we want to assess a child, we actually take the weight of the child and then we check the height of the child. So depending on the age of the child, for children who are, between 0 to 2, we check their height using what we call an infantometer. Okay? And then for children who are above, we use the stadiometer to check their height. So when we check the height, we're able to calculate the BMI, and then we are able to compare it on a growth chart, the WHO growth chart, to be able to identify whether the child falls, in the normal category, or the child is overweight, or the child is obese. So we are able to determine that using the WHO growth chart. And so this is actually done for children below 18. And the weight of the child is taken as well as the height. So any measure above the 95th percentile is considered obesity, and any measurement below the 5th percentile is considered overweight. So for someone who has a child and is wondering what I'm saying, basically I'm saying that when we check the BMI for the age and then we realize that the child falls above the 95th percentile, we categorize the child as obese. And then when we being over the 95th percentile means that the child is actually bigger than 95% of the population. So this is actually not, normal. It's not normal. And then when you check the weight and then the child is actually below the 5th percentile, what it means is that the child is smaller than 95% of the population. So then this one we categorize this as undernutrition or stunting or overweight. Or the child being malnourished. So when it's over 95th percentile, it means the child is actually bigger than 95% of the population, and then we consider it, overweight or obese. And then when the child is lower or below the 5th percentile, we consider it undernutrition. So because BMI alone cannot be a determiner in, assessing children, we also add certain tests or measurements. Things like, you can also check for parameters like family history, because obesity is not just a condition that comes on its own. It has genetic compositions, it has nutritional factors, it has environmental factors. So you look at this as a whole. So you can have 2 parents who are obese, and it's likely that their children or their child is going to end up obese. This is because it has a genetic exposure to it, or a genetic aspect to it. Also, the other things you have to look at, the intake of the child, the food habits of the child. Certain children have developed certain food habits that are wrong and needs to be changed. Food habits such as, the child watching TV whilst eating. Because when you watch TV whilst eating, what happens to you is that until the movie is done, you're supposed to continue eating, and you will not be mindful about overeating. So these are certain things that we look at. Also, family history of diabetes and other health problems, notwithstanding the child's eating habits, activity level, or other health or psychological or psychosocial conditions such as depression. So sometimes we also do blood tests for cholesterol and sugar to check for further information to see whether maybe the child has an underlying condition such as diabetes. Because when it comes to diabetes, we have 2 types. We have the type 1 and we have the type 2. The type 1 usually occurs in children. And so children can also be faced with diabetes at a very younger age, which can predispose them to obesity. And you might not know that the child is having such a condition. So it's important to look at all this information. When you're assessing a child, you want to see whether a child is obese. You just don't look at the physical appearance alone, but then also you have to know what goes on inside. So let's look at nutritional therapy for both underweight and overweight. So treatment is usually, for obesity, treatment is usually based on changes in food habits and food intake, as well as physical activity. So we don't look at the treatments in just the food intake. We are looking at it in 2 aspects. We are looking at it in food intake, and we are looking at it in physical activity level. So when we look at food intake, we are looking at food habits, changing certain habits of the child that, can bring back the child to normal. And then when it comes to weight management in obese children, we are not looking at a drastic weight loss, because drastic weight loss, I keep saying, that may affect certain parts of the body that you might not know of. And these are children. They are growing. It's not like they are going to cease growing. So what we actually look out for is for them to grow in height rather than to grow in size. So we are looking at the child growing in height more, and then so that the weight will catch up, so that the physical activity will, the physical appearance will look like a normal person. Like, we are not looking at the child, keep growing in width or size and then growing short. We want the child to grow tall, but then not add a lot of weight to it. So children keep growing. So at that age, you can't say that you want to cease or you want to cut down the food so that the child does not take in so much food. No, it is actually a wrong thing to do.
Dietitian, someone is asking, how do I get my child to eat vegetables?
So if you want your child to eat vegetables, what you have to do is, children are actually smart, by the way. So you can't go ahead and then hide vegetables in their food. Because when the child is eating and the child realizes that, no, this is a vegetable, the child might spit it out. Yeah. So it's a problem where you look at it from different age groups. So when you look at a child who is actually very young, where the child basically has no say on what to eat, you can actually cook it and blend it into their diet.
That's right.
And then for children who actually are grown enough to make decisions, you can talk them through and look for vegetables they like and try as much as possible to put it in their diets little by little.
Okay. Someone is also asking, my child only wants one type of food. What should he do?
Okay, so if you have a child who wants one type of food, what you should do is that, it also goes both ways. If the child is old enough, you talk to the child. And then, as we say, there is a saying that goes like, variety is the spice of life. So when you stick with one type of food, the child might not gain all the nutrients available in the food. So it's important to make it vary, to give food differently. But then when you are giving the food, you should do it gradually, because children actually don't like new things. And it's even part of adults as well. People resist change. So when change comes, you need to do it gradually. So let's say the child likes only beans. When you're bringing in maybe Tom Brown, it has to be small. Maybe today you try it, the child might not like it, but the next time you try it again. So that is how to actually train a child to like different type of food.
Okay. But is it good to give your child one type of food even if he's healthy?
So even if the food is healthy, like I said earlier, variety is the spice of life. So it's very important that as much as possible, you try as much as possible to give different type of food. Even though it's healthy, you don't want the child to develop a food habit that will actually stay with the child for long. Because the child is going to grow up. Remember that the child is going to grow up, and you don't want the child to stick with the type of food that will end up when the child is old enough, the child still cannot make changes. Yeah. So it's very important that even though the food is healthy, still you need to enforce variety and diversity.
Is it okay to give juice to children?
So when it comes to juice, the issue is that we have 100% juice. Juice that has been freshly squeezed out from the fruits.
Natural juice.
Natural juice. Yeah. And then we also have juice that has been canned or boxed or industrially prepared. Now, when it comes to nutrition, number one, you always have to go with, something that is natural. So you should always go with something that is natural. And so it also goes hand in hand. When you take a child who is very young, between the ages of 0 to 2, this child usually is now teething, is now developing teeth. Yeah. So you are looking at juice. But then when you look at a child who can chew, you are not looking at juice, but in a more solid form. So like a smoothie, for instance. Because the fiber in there is very important, and you need to teach your children to like fiber at a very important age, because fiber will go a long way to help the children. So juice, it depends. It could be, if it's a child who cannot, chew, you can squeeze some freshly orange juice or watermelon juice for the child. But if it's a child who can chew, smoothie is the best, but the whole fruits is topmost.
What type of food do we give to children with anemia?
So when you're looking at children with anemia, what you are looking at foods that contain iron. So foods that contain iron, we have green leafy foods, like the vegetables, the contomere, the spinach. All the green leafy foods contain iron. And also, you are looking at foods that contain, heme. So when we talk about heme, we are looking at, in quotes, bloody foods like liver, the liver of animals. They are also very high in iron. And also certain foods have been fortified with iron, like milk. Okay, so these foods are all high in iron. But when it comes to the green leafy foods, what we are looking at is, because iron in green leafy foods are not easily absorbed into the blood, it has to go with vitamin C. So you can, before you give any green leafy foods, in order to ensure optimum intake of iron, you can give a glass or a little juice of orange because it contains vitamin C, which will help in the absorption of iron.
Okay.
Yeah.
But is it good to give children snack too as well?
So for snacks, also it goes hand in hand. If the child is not eating, the child is underweight, and you want to boost the child's nutrition, snack is very, very important, very necessary. But if the child is overweight, the child is obese, then I suggest that instead of giving just any snack, you should be mindful of which type of snack you give. Like when you give snacks that are high in fat, snacks that are high in sugar, all these things, boost weight. So if the child is already obese, it's like you are feeding on the obesity. But if the child is underweight, we are actually looking at healthy snacks. So if the snack is not going to interfere with the child's eating schedule, then fine, you can fix the snack over there. And the snack is supposed to be healthy. And we have so many snacks, but we usually don't make use of them. Corn is a very good example of a snack. Roasted corn or boiled corn with coconuts is a very good example of a snack. So many snacks are available, but then we usually like to go in for the biscuit, the high fatty snacks, and the rest, which I believe that we should now come back to our local snacks and then enjoy them.
So someone is asking, he said his son eats a lot.
Yeah.
He's still lean. What do he do?
Okay, so the person's son eats a lot, but is still lean.
Yeah.
What you do is that, you see, children are different. They have, and then we can also look at the genetic background of children. There are certain children who are physically active and others are not active at all. So when you look at this child who eats a lot but then is physically active, it makes sense because whatever the child eats, the child uses it again. Yeah. So when you have such a child who eats a lot but then is not growing lean, then it means that the issue is that whatever the child eats, the child uses it up quickly. So it's very important that, you increase the amount of food in terms of energy so that the energy intake, overshadows the energy that is burnt so that the child can actually gain weight. So it's not advisable to limit the physical activity unless maybe it's affecting the child's schooling or something. But then once the energy intake supersedes the energy output, the child will gain weight.
Okay. I want you to talk more about calcium and iron with children.
So when it comes to calcium and iron, the issue surrounding it is that usually when the sources are quite available, but when the person is lactose intolerant or the person is not able to actually digest foods that have milk in it, then it becomes a problem absorbing calcium. But then there are other alternatives. So for people who are lactose intolerant, there are other alternatives. You can go in for yogurts, you can go in for seeds and nuts. And these foods are high in calcium. But then for people who are not lactose intolerant, milk is a very good example or a very good source of food where you find calcium to build the bones for the child. So milk, you can find calcium in bones, fish bone, animal bone. So all these contain calcium. So all these food, when you put them in the child's diet, you are sure to boost the calcium.
But dietitian, how do you give bones to a child?
Yeah. Okay, so what happens is that when you want to give a child bone, you can actually mill the bone. If it's a soft bone, fine. It makes it easier. You can actually blend it, mill it, and add it to the stew or add it to the soup. And that's a very good way of putting bones in a child. Not that you put in the bone in the whole, form into the child. The child will not be able to take in the bone. Yeah.
Okay. Powdered bone.
Powdered bone is also a good source.
Okay.
So basically, these are the whole. When you're looking at weight management in children, you're looking at these. Aspects. You're looking at overweight and then undernutrition. But then this is a very big problem. Ghana is suffering from children who are underweight and then children who are obese. So it's very important that we up our game and then we help these children in our community so that they can also live a normal life.
I think this topic needs to be treated again. Next week, I think we have to go deeper into it and broadcast it to a large audience so that they can hear this.
I don't see Gabby,